There's a corner of your home you probably avoid looking at. Maybe it's where the yoga mat sits, rolled up, gathering dust. The one you bought 3 months ago with so much hope. Or the art supplies stacked in a drawer, half-used sketchbooks, paints that dried out because you stopped opening them. Or that online course you paid for, the one with 12 modules. You finished 2, and every time you see these things, something tightens in your throat. A quiet voice whispers, "You're doing it again." Society has a word for people like this, quitter. They say you lack follow-through, that you're all talk, no action, that you get excited about things but never see them through. The phrase they love most. Jack of all trades, master of none. The story is always the same. You discover something new. Photography, cooking, learning Spanish, running. You dive in completely. You research everything. You buy the books, the equipment, the subscription. You tell people about it. "I'm really into this now," you say, and you mean it. For 3 weeks, maybe a month, you're obsessed. You think about it constantly. You make progress. You feel alive. And then something shifts. The excitement fades. The motivation disappears. The thing that felt so important suddenly feels like a chore. So you stop, not dramatically, quietly. You just don't do it anymore, and you move on to the next thing. After enough cycles of this, the shame becomes permanent. You look at your history, a graveyard of abandoned projects, half-learned skills, hobbies that died the moment they stopped being fun. And you ask yourself the question that feels like proof you're broken. Why can't I just finish something? What's wrong with me? But here's what people don't understand. People assume that those who abandon hobbies are lazy, uncommitted, lacking discipline, or unable to delay gratification. But that's not the full truth. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes these are people with an unusually powerful drive for learning. People whose brains are wired to seek novelty and pattern recognition at a rate most people can't match. Neuroscientists have studied this extensively. They've found that certain brains are hypersensitive to something called the learning gradient, the rate at which you're acquiring new information. When that gradient is steep, your brain releases massive amounts of dopamine. When it flattens, the dopamine doesn't just decrease, it crashes. What if you're not broken? What if you're just operating with weak training in one specific part of your brain? When you start learning something new, your brain lights up. Everything is unfamiliar. The learning curve is almost vertical. You go from knowing nothing to understanding basic concepts in days. The information floods in. Your brain interprets this rapid acquisition as deeply rewarding. It releases dopamine, serotonin, the neurochemicals of pleasure and motivation. It feels incredible. This is what psychologists call the novice high, that intoxicating rush when everything is new and progress feels effortless. Your chest feels open. Your mind races with ideas. You stay up late watching tutorials. You talk about your new hobby to anyone who will listen. "I think I've finally found my thing," you tell a friend, and you believe it. But your brain is setting a trap, because this feeling, this rush of rapid learning, it's not sustainable. Eventually, you understand the basics. The core concepts click. You know how the system works. And suddenly, the learning curve flattens. You've entered the plateau, the place where progress becomes invisible, where improvement happens in millimeters instead of miles. And for your specific brain chemistry, the plateau feels like death, because the dopamine doesn't taper off gradually. It shuts off like a switch. This pattern doesn't begin in adulthood. It starts small, usually in childhood. A child tries piano, gets excited, practices every day for 2 months, then stops when the songs get harder. They join a soccer team, love it at first, quit when they're no longer the best player. They start reading a book series, devour the first 3, never finish the 4th. Adults around them notice. You never stick with anything. A parent says, not cruelly, just observing. Teachers write on report cards. Has potential but lacks persistence. Over time, the child internalizes a story about themselves. I'm the kind of person who starts things but doesn't finish them. That story becomes an identity, and even now, decades later, that identity runs your life. The moment something stops being fun, you interpret it as a sign, evidence that this thing isn't for you, that you should quit and find something that feels as good as the beginning did. But what if that interpretation is wrong? What if the signal you're reading as stop is actually grow? Here's what neuroscientists discovered. Your brain has a specific region responsible for doing hard things you don't want to do. It's called the anterior midcingulate cortex, the AMCC. Research shows this area only activates under one condition. When you're doing something difficult that you'd rather not do. If you love the task, the AMCC stays quiet. If you hate the task but do it anyway, the AMCC fires. And here's what matters. The AMCC functions exactly like a muscle. If you use it, it grows, it thickens, it becomes stronger. If you avoid using it, it atrophies, it weakens, it shrinks. Studies on what researchers call super-agers, older adults with exceptional cognitive function, reveal something fascinating. Their AMCCs are just as thick as those of people in their 20s. Why? Because they spent a lifetime doing hard things, pushing through discomfort, lifting the weight. For someone who quits every time things get difficult, the AMCC becomes incredibly weak. Every time you felt boredom or frustration in the past, you quit. You put the weight down. So now, even a tiny bit of discomfort, a confusing chapter in a book, a difficult technique in a new skill, triggers an immediate give-up response. It's like asking someone who's never exercised to suddenly run a marathon. Of course, you collapse. This feeling of weakness isn't a moral failing. It's physical atrophy in your brain. But here's the extraordinary news. The AMCC is plastic. It can grow at any age. You can train it, starting today. We live in a world designed to destroy your ability to push through difficulty. Your ancestors had limited sources of stimulation, a handful of activities, long stretches of boredom between moments of excitement. You have infinite content. Every app on your phone engineered to deliver instant dopamine. TikTok serves you exactly what you want every 15 seconds. Instagram shows you highlight reels. YouTube autoplay removes even the effort of choosing. Your brain is being conditioned for supernormal stimuli. Compared to a 15-second video, practicing guitar feels impossibly slow. Compared to scrolling, reading a textbook feels like suffocation. Your baseline for stimulation has become so high that normal learning feels like deprivation. Modern culture worships the novice high, the viral moment, the overnight success. It doesn't show you the 10,000 hours of boring practice behind mastery. You can be surrounded by learning resources and still feel completely unable to stick with anything. Because the problem isn't access to information, it's tolerance for boredom. Behind every abandoned hobby is a specific kind of shame. Not the shame of failure, the shame of self-betrayal. Because you told yourself this time would be different. You promised yourself you'd see it through. And then you didn't. People stop asking about your projects. They've learned not to take your enthusiasm seriously. When you mention starting something new, they smile, but their eyes say, "Sure you are." And you notice, there's a particular loneliness in being someone who can't trust their own commitment. You can't join communities of practice. You can't say, "I'm a runner" or "I'm a painter," because you know you're not. You're just someone who tried once for 3 weeks. Behind every moment of excitement about something new is quiet dread. Because you already know how this story ends. Not because you don't care, but because the moment it stops feeling good, you've never learned to continue. And that pattern makes you feel fundamentally unreliable, not just to others, but to yourself. There's something that shifts when you stop asking, "Why do I always quit?" When you start asking instead, "What happens in my brain when things get hard?" Because the pattern isn't really about the hobbies. It's about what happens at the plateau. The moment when the dopamine runs out and your AMCC is too weak to carry you forward. That moment is a fork in the road. One path leads back to the novice high, a new hobby, a fresh rush of dopamine. The other path leads through the plateau, through boredom, through the invisible growth that happens when you keep going anyway. Most people who quit aren't choosing the first path consciously. They're just following their weakest muscle. Maybe you don't need to find the right hobby. Maybe you need to train the muscle that lets you stick with any hobby. Because here's the truth they don't tell you. Mastery doesn't feel like the novice high. It feels like the plateau. The plateau is where the real work happens, where skill actually develops. And if you keep running from the plateau, you'll never experience what's on the other side. When you feel the urge to quit, you don't need to force yourself to work for 4 more hours. That's too heavy. You'll injure yourself and quit anyway. You just need to push 15% further than you want to. If you plan to practice for 20 minutes and you want to stop at 5, practice for 6. Then stop. That 1 extra minute, that tiny gap between what you wanted to do and what you actually did, that's the rep. That's how you thicken the AMCC. It's simple, mechanical, almost boring in its practicality. But over time, that weak muscle becomes strong enough to carry you through entire plateaus. And maybe you need to actively lower your dopamine baseline. Because if your brain is calibrated to high-intensity stimulation, normal learning will always feel unbearable. During your practice sessions, put your phone in another room. Turn off the music. Eliminate the competing sources of dopamine. Allow yourself to feel bored. Boredom isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's the clean slate required for deep learning. It's your brain shifting from consumption mode to creation mode. When you lower the background noise, the signal becomes clear. There's a difference between being a dabbler and being a polymath in training. A dabbler quits at the first plateau. They collect novice highs like stamps. A polymath pushes through multiple plateaus. They develop real skill in multiple domains. The difference isn't personality, it's strategy. It's the strength of one small muscle in your brain. So if you're someone who has never been able to stick with anything, please understand this. You're not lazy, you're not broken, you're not fundamentally uncommitted. You just have a weak AMCC, and that can change. There will still be moments when you start something new and the excitement fades. When you hit the plateau and every cell in your body screams to quit. That's okay. That's not failure. That's the moment that matters most. But there will also come a day when you finish something. When you push through the entire plateau and discover what's on the other side. And you'll realize that the thing you were chasing, that novice high, that rush of rapid learning, it was never the destination. It was just the entrance fee. The real reward is what happens when you stay. Not the dopamine rush, the quiet competence. Not the excitement, the depth. Not the feeling of starting, the identity of someone who finishes. Maybe that's what mastery actually is. Not the absence of boredom, but the ability to work through it. Not finding the perfect hobby, but becoming the person who can commit to an imperfect one. Not waiting for motivation, but training the muscle that doesn't need it. Not broken, untrained, not uncommitted, undisciplined, not a quitter, a beginner. Pick one thing, just one, not forever, just for 6 months. Train the muscle, lift the weight,